Welcome everybody to Fellowship Games, Dakota here, and today we're going to be going through a deck that I've been playing a lot on Arena in Standard over on our Twitch channel. That's going to be Izzet Giants. I'm sure you've seen this deck floating around a lot, especially at the early stages of Kaldheim Standard. It's a fun tribe that I'm sure everybody was willing to try out, but I'm sticking with it. And I'm trying to make it as competitive as possible. Kind of on a budget though, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But basically the deck, it's definitely a mid-range deck. It's not too aggressive. It can have like the rare semi-aggressive start, but it's very good at beating down on the other creature decks. We have a lot of removal, and we have a lot of cantrips to let us have some staying power against the control decks, and and let us stay into the late game with them. So as far as our payoffs, these are the cards that make us want to be a giant deck. And we have 4 copies of Quakebringer, 3 copies of Aegar the Freezing Flame, and then just 2 Calamity Bearers. I was playing 4 initially when I built my first version of the deck, but the problem is Giants aren't very explosive on the board. You're not going to go like turn 1 Giant, turn 2 Giant, turn 3 Giant, turn 4 Giant, and then attack with like a bunch of double strike essentially. So you don't really have the board states to really make the most of it. It's kind of like a 1-2 punch kind of thing where you like set up something, they don't answer it, then you can play this and like attack for like 8 with Bonecrusher. And yeah, this is more of like a closer, right? You've whittled them down. You just need like 1 combat phase to close it out. You just drop this and like swing in. Aegar the Freezing Flame gives us a lot of card advantage. So whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess damage, if one of our giants, a wizard, or a spell you control dealt damage to it this turn, draw a card. So basically, if we, squash like a questing beast, we're going to draw a card, that sort of stuff. So we're going to be playing a lot of like 1-for-1 removal, and then we're actually getting like these kind of 2-for-1s because we're actually getting a card back. And then we have Quakebringer. This is like one of our bigger finishers. I'm actually very high on this card. I've seen a lot of people go into the more control shells and then cut this, but I like it a lot. You can foretell it on 2 if you have nothing else to do. And then with Invasion of Giants, when you get the discount of mana, one of the later lore counters, you can actually just play this for 2 red, which is like pretty huge. You get this 5/4. Stopping the opponent from gaining life isn't too relevant. It stops some cards in the Doom Foretold decks. It hits clerics pretty hard. That is a deck that actually cares about gaining life, and most of their synergies revolve around gaining life. And then a lot of mono white decks have kind of that same like white cleric package, and yeah, you're gonna be able to stop that pretty easily. But the best part about Quakebringer is it gives us inevitability. So if we have one in our graveyard, we're dealing 2 damage every turn, and same, but only if we control another giant, and then same if we just have Quakebringer straight up. If we have a Calamity Bearer, we're dealing 4 on each upkeep, and then if we have multiples, we can deal like 4, 6, put a really fast clock on them. So I actually like Quakebringer quite a bit. Our other threats are Bonecrusher Giant. This is going to be an all-star. Bonecrusher Giant, I think right now, as of the recording of this video, is the most played card in Standard. Being able to be a burn spell or, shock a creature is pretty huge. And then having a 4/3 with a ability that shocks your opponent if they target it is pretty huge. This helps us pretty well against creature decks. Bonecrusher Giant, as well as some of our other removal later on, really makes it pretty easy for us to just pick these creature decks apart. Kill their thing, play a 4/3. Now they have to either kill it or, we get to trade with something or put up a big blocker. We also have Tectonic Giant. Tectonic Giant was one of my favorite cards spoiled in Theros Beyond Death, but it just got overshadowed by all the other crazy shenanigans going on with, looking at you, Uro, Croxa, that sort of stuff. But it's actually a very strong red card, and it's even better in our deck because we're giants. So basically, whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, we can either deal 3 damage to their face, or we can exile the top 2 cards of our library. We get to choose one of them until the end of our next turn. We get to cast a spell. So if we're already ahead on cards and we're already on the gas pedal and we're looking to close out the game, we're going to be throwing 3 upstairs. But if we're still trying to fight over card advantage, try to set ourselves up well for the late game, I almost always do the exile effect and get that extra card. I had more copies, but I think 2 is just right, and I really, really love Tectonic Giant. We also have 1 copy of Shatterskull Charger. This is basically just like a nice pick against these control decks when we want to be in a situation where, when we already have a Bonecrusher out, we want to continue pressuring them even more, but we don't want to commit to the board because there's a lot of sorcery speed wraths going around right now. We have Doomscar, we have Shatter the Sky, we have Blood in the Snow, we have Extinction Event. We have a lot of sorcery based sweepers, so it's nice to be able to keep attacking while dodging that, and we force them to have a 1-for-1 removal spell. This is obviously the first card that comes out when we're going up against a creature based deck, something like Gruul Adventures, where we want something that's on the board attacking and blocking. But then we also have 2 Goldspan Dragons. Obviously not a giant, but this is one of the top 3 most played creatures in the format right now. It's just one of the best red cards we've seen in forever. Flying Haste, whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, we get to create a token. So that's 3 creatures in our deck that do something whenever we're targeted, either making us mana, dealing damage, or drawing us a card. So we're pretty resilient to 1-for-1 removal, and we're pretty mana hungry. We play a lot of big giants, and we want to do a lot of like double spell turns. So this treasure actually adds up. And when I was in the stages of making this deck initially, I felt like I wanted more haste threats, something that could just, you know, they traded with all my stuff and then I can just rip something off the top and like just still keep putting a lot of pressure on them. And yeah, Goldspan, it just does that no matter what deck you put it in. It's just honestly one of the best cards in Standard. Now we have our card selection. So this is one of the other really big strengths of the deck. We have Glimpse the Cosmos and Invasion of the Giants. These are both very good cantrips, card selection, card advantage spells, but only if you're giants. So Glimpse the Cosmos lets us look at the top 3 cards of our library, put one of them into our hand, and the rest on the bottom of any order. But it also has essentially flashback if we control a giant. So being able to get 2 effects off of this one card is actually insane, and casting it for a single blue with the flashback makes it very efficient. You know, we can like play this on turn 2 and then like turn 4 play a Bonecrusher and then get another card. And then Invasion of the Giants does a lot of work. You know, scries 2, draws a card, we can reveal a giant, and then if we do, we can send 2 damage to target opponent or planeswalker, which is pretty nice. And then we get a discount on the 3rd lore counter on our mana. The next giant spell we cast costs 2 less to cast. So yeah, that allows us to cast our 4 told Quakebringers for just 2 red, which is like actually pretty huge. I am thinking about going back up to 3 copies. It just depends on how good Thrill of Possibility does. I did feel like I wanted ways to discard cards in my hand. You know, like if I'm stuck with a Quakebringer that I'm not going to cast anytime soon, I would love to like, yeah, discard it, draw some cards, keep going. So we have Thrill Possibility to fulfill that slot for now. We'll see how it goes. I can easily see just playing 1 Thrill and then just going back to Invasion of the Giants, just because Invasion of the Giants has just a lot of synergy with our whole deck. And now our straight up interaction package. So for 1v1 removal, we saw Bonecrusher Giant, we have Stomp, we have Scorching Dragonfire to deal 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and then of course it can exile. This has been, I don't want to say a staple, but a mainstay in Standard ever since it got printed. And then we also have Squash. This is very relevant for hitting big creatures, so things that have obviously more than 5 toughness, or planeswalkers that come in with a lot of loyalty. We can just snipe them right off the battlefield right away. And then we have Battle of Frost and Fire. This is our hoser against creature decks. The first lore counter, it comes in, it deals 4 damage to each non-giant creature and each planeswalker. So this makes, you know, planeswalkers that come in minus to make tokens like Vivian look absolutely stupid. And just, yeah, elves, all these mono white decks, all these red decks, we can just come in and just, yeah, clear the board. We do have to worry about, you know, opposing Bonecrushers. Like we said, it's the most played card in Standard, so we're going to see it in a lot of other red decks, and it's going to survive this. Changelings, I've made the mistake of playing on Arena, not realizing that Realm Walker is just going to survive this because it's also a giant. So yeah, keep that in mind while you're playing. You also get good value on a second lore counter, being able to scry 3. Nothing too crazy, just incidental value. You really want to play this as a 5-mana Wrath, but then being able to scry 3 on the following turn to make the most of that Wrath is pretty nice. Then on the 3rd lore counter, whenever you cast a spell with converted mana cost 5 or greater this turn, draw 2, then discard a card. Basically, that's just if we cast a Quakebringer, we get to, you know, do a little loot action, which is pretty nice. And then we have some counter spells. This is another thing I added to the deck later on. We have 1 Negate and 2 Disdainful Stroke. Disdainful Stroke is pretty important for catching Ugin. Like most, I want to say permanent-based decks, like Ugin will just wreck you. So we don't want to get wrecked by Ugin, so we want to make sure we have an answer for that. And then we also want to counter all of the ultimatums. We have the Sultai ultimatum that gives you insane value. We want to counter that, and especially the Teamer one. We have no real good answer to that. Like, if they just, you know, resolve their ultimatum and then just get, like, a bunch of crap onto the battlefield, we're going to struggle catching up from that, so we don't want these ultimatums resolving. And then Negate does the same purpose, counters Ugin, counters ultimatums. It can snipe these big enchantments like Elspeth Conquers Death that are floating around Standard, Doom Foretold. It can pick up Wraths, so we can protect our board from like Doomscar, all that good stuff. Or, you know, we can just trade 1-for-1 with it. If they go to, you know, Murderous Rider, our Bonecrusher Giant, we can just protect it. So it can also help against opposing 1-for-1 removal decks. So moving on to the mana base, this is where we see some of the budget effects. Our main dual land of choice is going to be the Riverglide Pathway to give us that flexibility of either color. We have 2 Temple of Epiphanies and 2 Fabled Passage. 2 Fabled Passage is enough just to help us thin the deck, fetch out colors when we need it. But then we're also playing the Snow Duel. This is where we're doing some budgeting here. As we all know, rare wild cards are pretty hard to come by on Arena. So in a perfect world, I would have just a full playset of Temple of Epiphany. But, you know, we can rock the common dual lands for a bit. And to finish up the mana base, we have one Castle Embereth. This isn't a card I was too high on, but I saw a lot of other lists playing it, and I can see, you know, there's some situations where I've been just short on a little bit of damage. So being able to just, you know, on a turn, you don't peel anything off the top to actually play. You're just attacking for lethal, but you're just short of lethal on board. You can just pump this, get it out. It works good with Calamity Bearer. It's going to deal even more damage. We also have two Shatterskull Smashings that we have tucked away in the mana base here. So again, we can also get some 2-for-1s against creature decks. We also have a single Soul Sear that I forgot to mention as well. 5 damage, it can exile a thing. Pretty good. Basically, it can slap Yorion, and we need an answer for Lovestruck Beast. And then, yeah, we just have our 5 islands, 6 mountains. And then moving on to the sideboard, we're going to struggle less with creature decks like we already established, more with control decks. So we're going to bring in more counterspells. 3 negates is probably a little too many. I didn't have 1 negate in the main initially, so 3 negate might be too many in the sideboard. But we're also going to bring in Mystical Dispute against other blue control decks. Shark Typhoon has been one of the best control cards in the format, and I think it does a lot of work here. If we're able to resolve it and then basically make another shark to accompany each giant we make, is pretty huge. And then we also have Royal Scions. This is going to be pretty good. It comes in, it draws and discards. It allows us to play our game plan still. You know, it can pump a creature, that sort of stuff, but it's a little bit more resilient to removal. And then we also have 1 Red Cat melee for those mono red decks, just a little bit of extra cheap, efficient removal. 2 Shredded Sails. This is a card that still deserves its place in Standard. Being able to cycle this when you don't need it, but then still being able to pick up 4 damage to flyers is still pretty good against the rogue decks. And then being able to destroy target artifact in a format where Embercleave and the Great Henge are still running around. This is still a very good sideboard card and a fringe main board card. And then we have 2 Soul Guide Lanterns to help against, you know, we still have escape cards running around. We have Doom Foretold decks that are still using the graveyard. We have Zenith Flare and the cycling decks. We still need our graveyard hate running around. So yeah, that's going to do it for Izzet Giants in Standard. So this deck has been a lot of fun playing on Arena. Like I said, it does very good against creature decks and it has a lot of play against the control decks. If you want to see the deck in action, check out the link in our description to our Twitch channel. We stream Magic every Monday. And yeah, we have our Discord, all that good stuff in there. Just check the links in the description. Thanks so much for watching. This is Dakota, and we'll see you in the next video. Peace.